The new Doom is out. Let's see how my Ryzen 5 5600X with RTX 3070 on a B450 platform will handle it. The full system spec is in the video description below. Let's have a look. Starting with 1080p resolution and ultra quality preset, without DLSS, my system managed to put out 58 frames per second on average, 46 for 1% lows and 43 for 0.1% lows. That was pretty close to 60 FPS threshold and meant pretty smooth gameplay. Going through all the quality settings, we can see that switching from Ultra to Nightmare and Ultra Nightmare preset resulted in pretty much the same average frame rate, little under 60 FPS. Lowering the quality settings to High did almost nothing, 1% more than Ultra settings. With medium settings, the average frame rate passed the 60 FPS barrier and landed at 66 FPS. That was a 14% increase compared to Ultra settings. It was an increase in the average frame rate with actually no noticeable change in the graphical quality. Lowest quality settings gave 75 frames per second on average and 60 and 55 FPS for the 1% and 0.1% lows respectively. That meant that there was a 31% difference in the average frame rate between the highest and the lowest settings, but in general all settings gave close to 60 FPS on average, and the visual difference between the settings was quite hard for me to notice. At 1440p, things started to look a bit different. At ultra settings without DLSS, the RTX 3070 with Ryzen 5 5600X managed to put 39 frames per second for average frame rate, with 29 FPS for 1% low and 27 for 0.1% low. While I could play the game like that, it was definitely not a pleasant experience, especially when comparing it to the frame rate around 60 FPS range. It is fast-paced shooter, so you do benefit from a higher frame rate. Looking at all the graphical settings at 1440p, we can see that there is a difference of 18% in average frame rate between Ultra Nightmare and Ultra settings, and 38% between Ultra and Low preset, making the last one very close to the industry standard 60 FPS. So for my system, the choice at 2K no DLSS would be low settings, since I personally had a hard time seeing noticeable difference in the quality, especially in battles, but more for that later in the video. At this resolution, without DLSS, the game was using pretty much all the VRAM at any graphical settings, though I didn't experience any issues like stutters or missing textures. So, what happened when instead of TAA I used DLSS quality? Well, at 1080p on ultra settings, the average frame rate was 77 FPS and both 1% and 0.1% lows were over 60 FPS. DLSS definitely improved the frame rate without noticeable change in quality of the picture. Looking at all the graphical presets, DLSS quality setting pushed the average frame rate in the zone between 75 and 104 FPS for the highest and lowest preset. Compared to the native resolution, the Nvidia upscaling technology gave an increase in the average frame rate between 32 and 39% for the different quality presets. This meant that whichever setting we chose, we had 60 plus FPS even at the 0.1% lows. Also, it seems like the VRAM had a little bit more headroom compared to native resolution. Frame rates were definitely better with DLSS, but what about the image quality? Well, to be honest, I could not point out major differences or elements that looked noticeably worse with upscaling setting. Looked good to me, but let me know what you think. At 1440p Ultra settings, with DLSS, my 3070 pushed the average frame rate from 39 to 55 FPS, which was a 41% increase and frame rate pretty close to 60 FPS. That made the game way smoother and nicer to play at those quality settings. In order to actually pass the 60 FPS threshold, I needed to choose a medium quality preset, which gave me 63 average FPS or 40% increase compared to native 2K resolution. If we compare all graphical presets at 1440p with DLSS quality, we can see an increase of the average frame rate by 35 to 67%, pushing it very close to 60 FPS mark for the higher quality settings and crossing it for low and medium. That meant that 3070 could be named 1440p 60 card for this game if using upscaling. At ultra settings, the VRAM buffer was almost full, but still not completely full, at least according to MSI Afterburner. What about the visual difference between native 1440p resolution and upscaled one? Here I also could not find noticeable difference in the image quality, so at least for me, DLSS increased the frame rates without significant change in the way the game looked, and the game definitely was more enjoyable with higher frame rate. It's just what type of game Doom is. Here is a side-by-side comparison between the 6 graphical presets in the game at 1440p. I don't know about you, but I have a pretty hard time noticing a big difference in the quality of the picture, especially in the action-packed moments of the game. Even at lowest preset, the level of detail was pretty good and didn't feel like something is missing in terms of picture quality. So this is how my 5600X and RTX 3070 on an old B450 platform performed in the latest game from Doom franchise. And I think the system did a good job. In both tested resolutions, it was the graphics card that had to do most of the work, and at 1080p the GPU managed to hit average frame rate around the 60 FPS mark for the higher quality presets. Using DLSS pushed that number even higher without noticeable penalty for the picture quality. 1440p native was a bit too much, requiring using the lowest preset for enjoyable gameplay. Here, DLSS gave the necessary push for reaching the sweet spot for average frame rate and guaranteed smooth action with high quality graphics. That's it for this video, thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.